All right, so you ready to dive into the world of Teflon?
You bet. It's a story that's more slippery than you might think.
It's more than just non-stick pans, that's for sure. We're going deep with excerpts from the American Scandal podcast, all about DuPont, the company behind it all.
And what's really fascinating is how this seemingly simple material leads us to bigger questions about corporate responsibility and the impact of their decisions.
So for today's deep dive, we're using excerpts from the American Scandal podcast, focusing on DuPont. Buckle up because this story jumps back and forth in time. It's not a straight line.
It's a story full of twists and turns, unexpected discoveries, and some pretty dark secrets.
Sounds like a wild ride. So let's rewind the clock way back to 1938. We meet Roy Plunkett, a young chemist working at DuPont.
Yeah, he's not dreaming up non-stick cookware or anything like that at this point. He's on a quest for a new refrigerant.
He's working with this gas called tetrafluoroethylene, or TFE for short.
Expensive and hard to handle, but Plunkett thought it had potential.
So he's running this experiment, expecting this TFE gas to just come hissing out of the cylinder.
And nothing. Silence. No hiss. No gas.
Just a few flakes of this weird white powder. I can't even imagine what must have been going through his head at that moment.
Right, like what just happened. But here's the thing. Plunkett is curious.
He's got that scientific mind always asking questions.
So instead of just tossing it out, he decides to cut open the cylinder to see what's going on.
And what does he find inside? This waxy white substance. And this is where things start to get really interesting.
This stuff, it's like nothing he's ever seen before.
It doesn't melt, it doesn't dissolve, and get this, nothing sticks to it.
Talk about a light bulb moment. Plunkett realized he had stumbled onto something totally unique. It's incredible how sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from these unexpected detours in research.
Who would have guessed that a failed refrigerant experiment would lead to the invention of Teflon? It's like one of those moments in history where a wrong turn leads to the discovery of a new continent.
That's a great analogy. But as we'll see, this new continent of Teflon came with its own set of challenges and controversies.
Okay, so to understand that, we need to fast forward a few decades to 1996 in rural West Virginia.
This is where we meet Earl Tennant, a cattle farmer whose life is about to change in a big way.
And when I say cattle farmer, I don't mean some massive industrial operation.
No, not at all.
Tennant's farm is his life, his legacy. He knows every one of his cows by name. That's how connected he is to them. But then something starts to go terribly wrong.
His cows, they start getting sick. Some of them even die.
And the creek water on his property, it's foamy and polluted. Tennant starts to suspect that something's off.
He's about to find himself in a battle against a corporate giant.
That giant, you guessed it, is DuPont.
Remember that landfill we mentioned? Well, turns out it was purchased from Tennant's brother, and DuPont started using it to dump waste.
Tennant starts to connect the dots pretty quickly.
Yeah, he believes that landfill and the waste being dumped there is what's causing his cows to get sick and polluting the water.
And to add insult to injury, when he tries to raise the alarm with government agencies,
Rickets!
they don't seem to be taking him seriously.
You can imagine how frustrating that must have been, like you're shouting into the void.
It's the kind of situation that would make anyone feel completely helpless. But Earl Tennant, he's not the kind of guy to give up easily. He knows something's wrong, and he's determined to get to the bottom of it.
So he starts documenting everything. I mean, meticulously documenting everything.
He's like a one-man investigative team. Takes photographs of the sick cows, collects jars of the polluted water, even keeps samples from autopsies of the cows that died.
He knew he needed proof, something to back up his claims.
So he's got this mountain of evidence.
Yeah.
But how do you take on a company as big and powerful as DuPont? This is David versus Goliath.
It seems like an impossible task. But that's where our next key player enters the story. In 1998, Tennant manages to get in touch with Robert Below, a lawyer at a prestigious firm in Cincinnati.
Talk about a world away from a West Virginia cattle farm.
Right. Below's world is corporate clients, complex legal battles, big city life. Tennant's world is about as far away from that as you can imagine.
So how does this cattle farmer from West Virginia end up connecting with a high-powered lawyer in Cincinnati?
It's a bit of a long shot, but Tennant manages to convince Below to at least meet with him.
I'm guessing Below wasn't exactly jumping at the chance to take on this case.
Initially, he's hesitant. He's not even sure if this is the kind of case his firm would handle. But something about Tennant's story gets to him.
Was it the evidence? The sheer amount of evidence Tennant had gathered.
It was a combination of things, really. The desperation in Tennant's voice, the sheer amount of evidence he had collected, and the gut feeling that something truly wrong was happening. Below later said that what really got to him were the videos Tennant had taken of his sick cows. He had to fight back tears watching them. He saw the suffering, the pain, and he knew he couldn't just walk away.
So despite his reservations, Below decides to take on the case. He sees the injustice, the imbalance of power, and he's moved to action.
It's a classic underdog story. We've got a tenacious farmer, a lawyer with a conscience, and a giant corporation with a secret.
Okay, I am hooked. This is already sounding like a legal thriller. What happens next?
Well, Below files a lawsuit against DuPont alleging illegal dumping and the harm it's causing to the tenant's livelihood. But what he doesn't know yet is that this case is about to get a whole lot bigger and more complex.
What do you mean? What's he about to uncover?
That's for the next part of our deep dive, but I'll give you a hint. It all comes down to a chemical called C8, a key ingredient in Teflon production. And what Below discovers about C8 is going to send shockwaves through the entire case.
Okay, so this lawsuit is in motion, but now we've got this C8 chemical. What's the deal with that?
Well, C8 is a crucial ingredient in making Teflon. That's what gives it those amazing nonstick properties. But what Below uncovers is that C8 is not exactly a harmless substance.
Wait, are you telling me the stuff that keeps my eggs from sticking to the pan could be dangerous?
Well, it's not quite that simple, but there's definitely cause for concern. Remember those foamy waters in Tennant's Creek?
Yeah.
That foaming, that's actually a sign of something called a surfactant, which is basically a substance that reduces the surface tension of liquids. And guess what?
Right.
C8 acts as a surfactant.
So you're saying that C8, the chemical used to make Teflon, is also the stuff that's polluting Tennant's Creek and potentially harming his cows.
Bingo. And this is where things start to get really complicated for DuPont.
How so?
Well, Teflon was a huge moneymaker for them. It was in everything. Cookware, clothing, aerospace applications, you name it.
So I'm guessing they weren't too happy about this lawsuit.
Let's just say they weren't going to go down without a fight.
So what did they do? Did they try to settle quietly, sweep it under the rug?
Not even close. They came out swinging, using every legal tactic at their disposal. Delay tactics, document dumps, you name it. They even tried to discredit Tennant, suggesting that he was just a bad farmer and that's why his cows were getting sick.
Wow, that's low.
Mhm.
So how did Below handle all of this? I imagine going up against a corporate giant like DuPont can be pretty overwhelming, especially for a lawyer who's used to a different kind of legal battle.
Yeah, it definitely took a toll on him. He was facing mountains of paperwork, endless delays, and constantly feeling like he was outmatched. I mean, there were moments when he doubted if he could even make a dent in DuPont's armor.
That's when you need someone in your corner, right? Like a mentor. Someone to keep you going when you're about to throw in the towel.
Yeah, he had a great boss, someone who really believed in him. And his boss saw how hard DuPont was fighting and realized that they wouldn't be doing that unless they were worried.
So they were scared.
They were scared that Below was onto something big.
Okay, so Below keeps digging into this C8 mystery and
He stumbles upon a crucial piece of information. It turns out that C8 is chemically very similar to a substance that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, was trying to ban.
hold on. You're telling me that this stuff, the C8 that's potentially polluting Tennant's farm, is also something that the EPA wants to ban.
Exactly. Talk about a major red flag.
This isn't just about a farmer and his cows anymore.
Nope.
If C8 is as dangerous as it seems, then countless communities near DuPont's facilities could be at risk. This is turning into a public health crisis.
Yep.
So what does Below do with this bombshell? Does he go public?
He knew he had to tread carefully.
Uh-huh.
He needed more than just suspicion.
Mm.
He needed hard proof that DuPont knew about the dangers of C8 and chose to ignore them. He needed to find that smoking gun.
All right, so Below needs proof. Hard proof that DuPont knew about the dangers of C8 and didn't do anything about it. I mean, that's a pretty tall order, right?
Oh, absolutely. This isn't some small-time operation. DuPont has a whole army of lawyers. They've been around for decades. They know how to cover their tracks.
But Below's not giving up. And remember, this whole thing has been going on for years now.
It really shows you how long these legal battles can drag on. It's not like in the movies where everything gets wrapped up in an hour and a half.
So how does he finally catch a break?
Well, he keeps digging, right. And finally, he gets his hands on something huge.
He finds the smoking gun.
It's better than a smoking gun. It's a whole arsenal. He uncovers this treasure trove of internal DuPont documents. And let me tell you, these documents were damning. They revealed that DuPont had been conducting studies on C8 since the 1950s.
In the 1950s.
Yeah, way back then. And get this, those studies showed a link between C8 exposure and health problems in their own workers.
Hold on. So they knew.
They knew.
They knew about the risks all along, and they just kept using it.
It's all right there in the documents. Memos, reports, scientific data, all pointing to the potential harm of C8.
This is where it gets really infuriating, right? It's one thing to make a mistake, but to knowingly put people's health at risk just to protect your profits, that's just wrong.
No question about it. It raises serious ethical questions.
What happened when all of this came to light?
Well, you can imagine the public was outraged. I mean, here's this company touting Teflon as this miracle product, this revolutionary material that's changing our lives. And all the while, they're fully aware that one of its key ingredients could be harming people.
I bet Earl Tennant felt vindicated. After all those years of being ignored and dismissed, the truth finally came out.
Absolutely. All those jars of polluted water, all those photos of his sick cows suddenly took on a whole new meaning. It wasn't just some isolated incident on a farm in West Virginia.
It was evidence of a massive cover-up.
A betrayal of trust, a complete disregard for the health and well-being of their workers and communities.
So what did DuPont do? Did they try to deny everything?
Of course, they tried to downplay it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Below had them cornered. He built this incredibly strong case, arguing that DuPont knowingly exposed people to a dangerous chemical and that they needed to be held accountable.
So what happened? What was the outcome of all this?
Well, the case dragged on for years. It went through multiple appeals and legal challenges, but eventually DuPont was forced to settle.
So Below won.
It was a partial victory. DuPont agreed to pay a significant sum to the tenants and other affected families.
And did they stop using C8?
Well, eventually. They also had to fund health studies and environmental monitoring programs to assess the long-term impact of C8 contamination. But it was a long and hard-fought battle, and it all started with one farmer who refused to be silenced.
The story of Teflon is a reminder that progress often comes at a cost. And sometimes that cost is paid by those who are most vulnerable.
It's a story about the power of individuals to stand up to even the biggest corporations, about the importance of speaking truth to power.
And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in holding corporations accountable for their actions. We need to stay informed, ask questions, and demand transparency.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, it's about protecting our health, our communities, and our planet.
That's it for today's deep dive. We'll be back next time with a whole new topic to explore. Until then, stay curious.